Before you water your orchid again, repot it into fresh soil, or cut another silver root, stop for a moment. Because one of the most common reasons a beginner orchid starts to fail is not neglect. It is not because the owner forgot about the plant. It is usually the opposite. The orchid is being watched closely, watered carefully, moved around the house, cleaned up, trimmed, and adjusted, again and again. The person is trying to help. But orchids, especially the Phalaenopsis orchids many people buy at grocery stores, do not respond well to being treated like ordinary houseplants. Maybe this sounds familiar. You brought home a beautiful orchid with smooth green leaves, a tall flower spike, and big, perfect blooms. It looked elegant on the kitchen counter or near a bright window. For a few weeks, everything seemed fine. Then the flowers began to fade. The leaves looked a little softer. The roots inside the clear pot turned different colors. Some looked green, some looked silver, and a few near the bottom looked brown. So you wondered, does it need more water? Does it need new soil? Should I cut those strange roots off? Should I put it in more sun? That is the exact moment when many orchid problems begin. In this video, we are going through 5 things you should never do to an orchid, especially if you're growing a Phalaenopsis orchid indoors. These are not rare mistakes. These are the ordinary things people do with good intentions. Using regular soil, watering when the roots are still green, leaving water inside a decorative pot, putting the orchid in harsh direct sun, and cutting silver roots just because they look dry. And the last mistake is one of the easiest ways to remove healthy roots without realizing it. This is not about making orchid care scary. It is about making orchid care simpler. If you know what not to do, you can stop guessing. You can look at the roots, the pot, the light, and the leaves, and understand what the plant is trying to show you. One reason this topic matters is that orchids often decline slowly. They do not always collapse in one dramatic day. First, the roots stay wet, a little too long. Then, one lower root turns soft. Then, the leaves lose a little firmness. Then, the owner waters again, because the plant looks thirsty. By the time the problem is obvious, the mistake has already been repeated many times. That is why prevention is so powerful with orchids. You do not need a complicated routine. You need to recognize the few habits that create the most trouble. As you listen, do not think of these 5 mistakes as separate, random tips. They all connect to the same idea. The roots must be able to breathe, dry, and function. When the roots are protected, the leaves and flowers have a much better foundation. When the roots are damaged, even perfect-looking flowers cannot protect the plant for long. So let's start with the mistake that seems completely normal, because almost every other houseplant grows this way. Never plant an orchid in regular soil. This sounds strange to a beginner because soil feels like the natural place for a plant. If a plant is weak, we think fresh soil will help. If a plant is not growing, we think richer soil might feed it. If a plant is loose in the pot, we think packing soil around the roots will hold it steady. That makes sense for many plants, but it can be a serious problem for a Phalaenopsis orchid. Most common indoor Phalaenopsis orchids are not built like a tomato plant, a basil plant, or a peace lily sitting in regular potting soil. Their roots need moisture, but they also need air around them. That is the part beginners often miss. Orchid roots are not just drinking straws. They are living roots that need oxygen. When they are buried inside heavy, wet, compact soil, they can stay too wet for too long, and the air spaces around them disappear. Regular potting soil may look rich, dark, and healthy. But for orchid roots, it can feel like being wrapped in a wet blanket. At first, the plant may not show the problem. The flowers may still look beautiful. The leaves may still look green. But inside the pot, the roots can begin to struggle. The mix stays wet. The bottom of the pot dries slowly. Air cannot move well. Over time, firm roots can become soft, brown, hollow, or mushy. This is why an orchid can look fine above the pot, while the root system is quietly going downhill below the surface. A better setup for most indoor Phalaenopsis orchids is a loose orchid mix, often based on bark. Bark pieces create spaces between the roots. Those spaces allow water to run through and air to return after watering. Some mixes may include perlite, charcoal, or a small amount of sphagnum moss, depending on your home environment and how fast the pot dries. The exact mix can vary, but the basic goal is the same: moisture without suffocation. Now, this does not mean you should panic and repot every orchid the second you bring it home. If your orchid is blooming, the roots look mostly healthy, and the mix is not broken down, soggy, sour-smelling, or packed like mud, you may not need to disturb it immediately. The point is not to create another stressful job. The point is to avoid moving an orchid into regular houseplant soil because it looks more familiar. If your orchid is already in soil or in a heavy mix that stays wet for a long time, pay attention to the roots first. Use a pot with good drainage. A clear pot can help because you can see what is happening inside. Do not pack the mix tightly around the roots. Do not bury the crown of the plant. Do not try to make the orchid stand upright by pressing the roots into a dense, wet mass. Give the roots something they can hold on to, but also give them air. If you are filming this, the visual proof is very simple. Hold a handful of wet potting soil in one hand and orchid bark in the other. The soil sticks together. The bark falls apart into chunks with open space between them. That open space is not empty waste. For an orchid root, that space is part of the growing environment. It is where air returns after watering, and it is one reason the roots can stay firm instead of staying trapped in dampness. The important lesson is this: orchids do not want to be smothered. They want a balance. Water can enter, water can drain, and air can come back. If you remember that, this first mistake becomes easy to avoid. Do not treat the orchid like a regular houseplant. Do not assume richer and heavier means better. For many orchids, especially Phalaenopsis, the healthier direction is often lighter, airier, and better draining. But even if your orchid is in the right mix, the next mistake can still rot the roots quietly inside the pot. Never water when the roots are still green. This is probably one of the most common beginner mistakes because it feels responsible. Many people want a schedule. They want to know, should I water every 7 days? Every Saturday? Twice a week? Once a week in summer and less in winter? A schedule feels safe because it removes the guesswork. But orchids do not dry at the same speed in every home. A Phalaenopsis sitting in a warm, bright room may dry faster than one sitting in a cool room with air conditioning. A plant in bark may dry differently from a plant in moss. A small pot may dry faster than a large pot. A pot with side holes may dry faster than a plastic pot sitting inside a decorative container. Even two orchids in the same house can need water on different days. So instead of asking, what day is watering day? Ask, what is the plant showing me right now? This is where clear pots are useful. When Phalaenopsis roots are green, they usually still have moisture. Green roots are not begging for water. Most of the time, they are telling you to wait. If you water again while the roots are still green and the mix inside the pot is still damp, the plant may not get enough time to breathe between waterings. The roots remain wet, the center of the pot stays damp, and the risk of root rot increases. This does not mean green roots are bad. Green roots are usually a good sign. They often show that the root is alive and hydrated. The mistake is seeing a healthy green root and thinking it needs more. Silver or grey roots can mean the outer layer is drier. But even then, do not use color alone as your only rule. Check the mix. Look deeper into the pot, not just at the top. Feel the weight of the pot if you are used to doing that. A pot that still feels heavy may still have moisture inside. Bark on top can look dry while the middle of the pot is still damp. Moss can stay wet much longer than it appears from the surface. This is why watering by calendar can cause problems. The calendar does not know if your home is humid. It does not know if your air conditioner is running all day. It does not know if the decorative pot is trapping moisture. It does not know if the orchid is in old, broken down bark that holds water too long. Your orchid does not need water because a certain number of days passed. It needs water when the roots and potting mix have dried enough for that plant in that environment. A simple beginner habit is to pause before watering. Pick up the clear pot. Look at the roots. Look at the mix. Ask yourself, are many of the roots still green? Is there condensation inside the pot? Does the bark still look dark and damp deep inside? Does the pot still feel heavier than it does when dry? If the answer is yes, step away from the watering can for now. A helpful practice is to compare the same pot when it is freshly watered and when it is dry. After a few times, your hands begin to learn the difference. A dry pot often feels lighter. A wet pot feels heavier and cooler. This is not a perfect scientific measurement, but it trains you to observe instead of obeying a calendar. Observation is what separates careful orchid care from automatic orchid care. This is where many beginners accidentally love the orchid too much. They see the plant as delicate, so they give it more water. But more water is not always more care. Sometimes the most caring thing you can do is wait one more day, then check again. When you do water, the goal is usually not to give a tiny nervous splash. The better idea is to water thoroughly and then let the pot drain completely. Water should move through the mix and out of the drainage holes. The roots get moisture, and then the pot is allowed to dry again. What you want to avoid is constant dampness with no breathing period. And this connects directly to a confusing symptom: wrinkled leaves. Many beginners see wrinkled leaves and immediately think, "My orchid is thirsty. I need to water more." Sometimes that is true, but not always. If the roots are damaged from staying too wet, the leaves can wrinkle because the plant cannot take up water properly. In that case, adding more water does not fix the problem. It can make the root problem worse. So, before you water a wrinkled orchid, check the roots. If the roots are firm and the mix is dry, watering may help. But if the roots are brown, mushy, hollow, or sitting in a wet pot, the problem is not simple thirst. The problem is that the roots may not be functioning well. That is why the root check comes before the watering can. Now here is the part that fools people. Sometimes the orchid is not overwatered from the top. It is drowning from the bottom. Never let water sit inside the decorative pot. This mistake is extremely common with grocery store orchids because many of them are sold in a clear plastic pot placed inside a pretty ceramic or decorative outer pot. The outer pot makes the plant look finished. It hides the plastic. It matches the room. It makes the orchid feel like a gift, a centerpiece, or a clean indoor decoration. The problem is that many decorative pots have no drainage hole. So the beginner waters the orchid, sees the water disappear from the top, and assumes everything is fine. But the water runs through the clear pot and collects at the bottom of the outer pot. The roots at the bottom may now be sitting in a hidden puddle. The top of the plant looks elegant, but down below, the lowest roots are trapped in water. This is why the decorative pot may be the most dangerous part of the whole setup. Not because decorative pots are always bad, but because they can hide standing water. An orchid can handle being watered thoroughly if the water drains away. That is very different from sitting in water for hours or days. When the bottom of the pot stays wet, the roots lose access to air. The lower roots often suffer first because they are closest to the trapped water. They can become soft, brown, and mushy. Once those roots stop working, the plant may have trouble taking up water, even if water is everywhere around it. And this is where the twist happens. This is why an orchid can have wrinkled leaves and still not need more watering. The leaves may look thirsty because the roots are failing. The plant may be surrounded by moisture, but it cannot use that moisture well. So the owner waters again, thinking they are helping, and the hidden water problem gets worse. If you have a grocery store orchid, check this today. Lift the clear plastic pot out of the decorative pot. Look inside the bottom of the outer pot. Is there water sitting there? Is there a wet smell? Are the lower roots darker than the upper roots? Does the plastic pot feel wet at the bottom long after watering? If yes, the orchid may not be drying properly. The solution is simple, but it must become a habit. After watering, let the orchid drain completely. You can take the inner pot to the sink, water it thoroughly, and then let all the extra water run out before placing it back into the decorative pot. You can also check the outer pot afterward and dump out any water that collected inside. If you like the look of the decorative pot, you can still use it as a cover, but do not let it become a bathtub. Also, be careful with decorative wrapping. Some orchids are sold with plastic sleeves, foil, moss packed around the top, or tight decorative material around the pot. These may look pretty, but they can slow drying and trap moisture where you cannot see it. If something around the pot is holding water, hiding drainage holes, or keeping the base constantly wet, it is not helping the orchid. The rule is not, never use a decorative pot. The rule is, never let the orchid sit in standing water inside that pot. There is a big difference between soaking the roots briefly during watering and accidentally leaving the pot submerged. One gives the roots moisture, the other removes air. If your orchid has been sitting in water, do not panic. First, remove the standing water. Let the pot drain. Improve airflow around the pot. Check the roots. If most roots are still firm, the plant may simply need better drying habits. If many roots are mushy or hollow, then repotting and root cleanup may be needed later. But do not rush in blindly with scissors before you understand what is alive and what is not. The big lesson here is that water problems are not only about how often you pour water from the top. They are also about what happens after the water leaves your hand. Does it drain away? Does the pot breathe? Does the bottom dry? Or is the orchid sitting in a hidden puddle while the leaves slowly wrinkle? After water, the next mistake is light, and this one can damage the leaves before the roots ever show a problem. Never place an orchid in harsh direct sun. This mistake usually comes from another good intention. The beginner hears that orchids need light. They know plants need light to grow. They see a sunny window and think, perfect, this will help my orchid bloom again. And yes, orchids need light. A Phalaenopsis orchid kept in a dark corner will often struggle. It may survive for a while, but it may not grow strongly, and it may not have enough energy to bloom well in the future. So the answer is not darkness. The problem is harsh direct sun, especially hot sun through a window. A bright window can help your orchid, but a hot direct sunbeam can burn it faster than you expect. Phalaenopsis leaves are not like cactus pads. They can be damaged when they sit in strong direct sunlight for too long, especially during the hotter part of the day. The glass can intensify heat. The leaf surface can become warm. What looked like a healthy bright spot can become too intense. Sun damage may show up as pale yellow patches, bleached areas, dry brown spots, or a rough burned section on the leaf. Sometimes the leaf looks like it has been scorched. Once a leaf is burned, that burned patch will not turn green again. The goal is to stop the damage from getting worse by moving the plant to better light. This is why bright and direct must be separated in your mind. A Phalaenopsis orchid usually does best with bright, indirect light. That might be near an east-facing window with gentle morning light. It might be near a bright window but pulled back from the direct beam. It might be behind a sheer curtain. It might be in a room where the orchid can see the sky, but the sun is not blasting the leaves for hours. In many American homes, the exact window matters. A south or west window can become very hot during certain seasons. Afternoon sun can be especially intense. A plant that seemed fine in winter might burn in summer when the angle and strength of light changes. A windowsill can also heat up, and the pot can dry unevenly. So instead of thinking, my orchid needs the sunniest spot, think, my orchid needs a bright spot without harsh leaf-burning rays. There is another subtle issue. When an orchid is stressed by too much sun, the plant may lose moisture faster. The leaves may become warm, buds may dry or drop. The owner may respond by watering more often, but the real problem is not only water, it is light stress combined with heat. So if your orchid has yellowish patches on the upper leaves, dry brown areas, or leaves that feel hot when the sun hits them, check the light before you assume it needs fertilizer or more water. Move it out of the direct beam. Give it bright, filtered light. Then watch the new growth, not the old burned spot. Old damage may remain, but new leaves should be protected. On the other hand, do not move the plant into a dark corner and call that safe. Too little light creates a different problem. The plant may stay alive but weak, with slow growth and poor blooming potential. The goal is balance. A good beginner test is simple. During the brightest part of the day, look at where the light falls. Are the leaves sitting in a sharp, hot sunbeam? Does the leaf surface feel warm? Is the plant pressed against hot glass? If so, adjust the position. Pull it back, shift it to the side, or soften the light with a sheer curtain. Light should support the orchid, not punish it. So far, we have talked about soil, watering, hidden standing water, and harsh sunlight. Now we need to talk about the mistake that happens when people try to clean up the roots too aggressively. Never cut all silver roots just because they look dry. This mistake can seriously weaken an orchid because it removes the very thing the plant needs to recover: living roots. A beginner looks through the clear pot and sees roots in different colors. Some are green, some are silver, some are pale gray. A few may look tan or brown. The silver roots can look old, dry, or strange if you are not used to orchids. So the beginner thinks, those must be dead, I should cut them off. But not every ugly-looking root is a dead root. A silver Phalaenopsis root can be alive, firm, and useful. The outside layer of the root can turn silvery when it is dry. That does not automatically mean the root is dead. In fact, many healthy orchid roots look silver or grey between waterings. When they get wet, they may turn greener again. This color change is one of the reasons clear pots are so helpful, but it also causes confusion if you do not know what you are seeing. A dead or rotten root is usually judged by more than color. Texture matters. A living root often feels firm, full, and solid. It may be green, silver, or a mix of both. A rotten root often feels mushy, slippery, hollow, or collapsed. Sometimes the outer layer slides off and leaves a thin string inside. A dried dead root may be brittle, empty, papery, or clearly shriveled with no firmness left. Color gives clues, but texture gives stronger evidence. This is why you should not take scissors to every root that is not green. If you remove all the silver roots, you may be cutting away roots that still help the plant take up water and anchor itself in the pot. Then the orchid has fewer working roots, the leaves may wrinkle more, and the plant becomes slower to recover. The safest beginner rule is this: when in doubt, keep the firm root. Cut only what is clearly dead, rotten, mushy, hollow, or no longer functioning. If a root is silver but firm, leave it. If it is partly damaged but still has a firm living section, be careful. You do not need to make the root system look perfect. You need to preserve enough healthy roots for the plant to live. If you do need to trim roots during repotting, use clean scissors or pruners. Do not use dirty tools. Do not tear roots by hand if you can avoid it. Work slowly. Remove old, broken down mix. Rinse or shake away loose material gently. Then inspect the roots with patience. The goal is not to make the plant look neat for the camera. The goal is to remove what is clearly dead while protecting what is still alive. This also means you should not repot and cut roots just because the flowers faded. Flowers fading is normal. An orchid is not dead because the blooms are gone. Phalaenopsis flowers do not last forever. After blooming, the plant may enter a leaf and root growth phase. That is, when roots matter even more. If you cut too many healthy roots after the flowers fall, you may reduce the plant's ability to rebuild strength. Another common trap is trying to rescue a wrinkled orchid by cutting aggressively. The owner sees a struggling plant and wants to start fresh. They remove the old mix, then cut anything that looks imperfect. By the end, the plant has very few roots left. Sometimes trimming is necessary, especially with true rot, but over-trimming can turn a stressed plant into a much weaker plant. Orchid care is not about making the roots pretty. It is about learning which roots are useful. Here is a simple way to think about it. Green and firm is usually alive. Silver and firm is often alive. Brown and firm may need closer inspection because some roots stain from the mix. Brown, mushy, hollow, or foul-smelling is a bigger warning. Dry, papery, empty roots may be dead. If the outer covering slips off easily and only a thin inner thread remains, that root is no longer doing much work. But again, do not rush. If you are not sure, leave more roots rather than less. A slightly messy root system with living roots is better than a clean-looking plant with not enough roots to support itself. This final mistake matters because it changes the way you see the whole plant. The flowers are the decoration. The leaves show the plant's condition. But the roots are the engine. If you protect the roots, you protect the future of the orchid. So before we finish, let's put all 5 mistakes into one simple checklist you can remember every time you look at your orchid. Do not plant orchids in regular soil. A Phalaenopsis orchid needs an airy mix that gives the roots moisture and oxygen, not a dense wet mass that smothers them. Do not water when the roots are still green. Green roots usually mean the plant still has moisture. Check the roots, the mix, and the weight of the pot before you water again. Do not let water sit inside the decorative pot. Watering thoroughly is fine when the pot drains. Leaving the bottom of the pot in a hidden puddle is what creates trouble. Do not place your orchid in harsh, direct sun. Give it bright, indirect light, not a hot sunbeam that burns the leaves through the window. And do not cut silver roots just because they look dry. A firm silver root can be alive. Judge roots by texture, not color alone. The deeper lesson is that orchid care becomes easier when you stop treating orchids like ordinary houseplants. They do not want heavy soil. They do not want constant wetness. They do not want hidden standing water. They do not want harsh sun burning the leaves. And they do not need you to remove every root that looks different. Most of the time, the best orchid care starts with observation. Look before you act. Check the roots before you water. Check the bottom of the pot before you blame the leaves. Check the light before you add fertilizer. Check the texture of a root before you cut it. The goal is not to do more to your orchid. The goal is to stop doing the few things that quietly damage it. If your orchid is already struggling, avoiding these mistakes does not guarantee an instant recovery. Some plants have severe root loss. Some have old damage. Some need repotting, time, and careful aftercare. But removing the biggest sources of stress gives the plant a better chance to stabilize, grow healthier roots, and support stronger leaves over time. So today, choose one simple check. Lift the clear pot out of the decorative pot and look for standing water. Look at the root color before watering. Move the orchid out of a harsh sunbeam. Or look closely at a silver root before deciding it is dead. Small corrections can make a big difference because orchids often decline from repeated small mistakes. If you remember nothing else, remember this. Check the roots first, give them air, let the water drain, protect the leaves from harsh sun, and never cut a root just because it looks silver.